Hi everybody, Jason Wright here with Sourcefire's product management team, and I want to talk to you a little bit today about application control, which is a technology that we built into both our next generation IPS technologies and our next generation firewall technologies. And it's very important because if you think about how we used to deploy access control, it was based on this notion of the 5-tuple, which is the source and destination IP address, the port, and the protocol, right? And so those 5 pieces of information allowed us to control what applications were and were not used across the network. And that was great back in the day, but today's applications are a little more tricky, and they actually hop around different ports and they can tunnel themselves, and they're a little sneakier, and most of them are web enabled, which means that your firewall access control policy looks a little more like this, and it's a huge mess. And generally, you don't have the visibility into what is actually traversing the network and going back and forth. So in addition to giving you the visibility that is lacked from a 5-tuple based policy, which is also very difficult to maintain and reference, social media has become another iteration of need for application control itself these days. Social media opens up so many threats with regard to sharing of information, or social engineering and malicious link sharing, or even file sharing, whether it's malicious files coming down or sensitive information that can be posted up there. So being able to control who does what with applications is a very important aspect for social media. In addition, some of these applications out there are huge bandwidth hogs, right? They can be streaming media or be doing peer-to-peer file sharing, eating up your bandwidth for non-business purposes, so you want to be able to control that as well. Also, mobile applications have introduced a very interesting new threat because we don't have control over the applications that these mobile devices are often using, right? But if you want to be able to control from a network perspective where these mobile applications are allowed or are not allowed to go on your network, you can do that with a network-based application control solution here. Okay. Finally, probably the most important point, actually, if you think about how we could reduce the attack surface by limiting the number of applications that are allowed to communicate on our network, then you start to see how we could be a much more secure environment. If, for example, there's a piece of malware on an endpoint that's trying to covertly open up SSH or FTP channels and communicate that way, well, if those applications aren't allowed from a typical end user, for example, then they wouldn't be allowed to communicate, and you've kind of reduced the threat that way. But don't forget, of course, if an administrator or someone else on the network has need for those applications, you can certainly control who does and doesn't have access to applications by user or user group. And we interact with a LDAP and Active Directory to pre-populate your Active Directory groups in there and set your policy that way. So these technologies, again, are available as a next generation IPS and can be deployed as a layer 2 technology behind your firewall, or they can actually be deployed as the firewall itself, being a layer 3 hop on the network that separates and segregates portions of your network from the outside of the internet, right? So if you'd like to learn a little bit more about the solutions that we offer from Sourcefire, come see us over at sourcefire.com. We'll be waiting for you, and thanks for listening. Cheers.